So we're happy to have Dr. Tucker join us. Just a little background, he received a master's degree in statistics and a PhD in political science from the University of Georgia. Since 2004, he has headed the election night decision desk for CNN, and they have won Emmy Awards in 2007 and 2013 for their election night coverages of the elections in 2006 and 2012. In addition, they received a Peabody Award for its coverage of the 2008 presidential primaries. So a lot of experience. He's a really impressive piece, as is his other work in the other areas of statistics. So we just want to keep this introduction brief so that Dr. Tucker has time to share his insights. I just want to end by saying I admire anyone who gets to say when they're planning a talk, I'm in Paris right now. We'll talk about it when we get back. So welcome, Dr. Tucker.
I'm going to give you an overview, a history of election projections, and what's happening now. By what's happening now, I mean what's been happening over the last 2 months and will continue to happen until Election Day, and what happens on Election Day. And then I'll have a few words to say about pre-election polls, which is not something that I personally am involved in. So the focus here is on presidential elections. And in general elections, we also have to call a number of other races at the state level, which include senators, governors, and some referenda. So there's usually about at least another 50 races to call on election night besides the presidency. And, of course, the presidency is called state by state, so that's 51 elections. So there's around 100 elections. Probably this year there'll be a little bit more than 100 elections. We only call statewide elections. However, I do, as you'll see later on, have a decision team that also uses a model to determine early in the evening, fairly early in the evening, which party will control the House. On any given election night, some races are never called because they're too close to call, and that's usually when it's less than 1% difference and there may be a recount. Or there may be errors that we don't want to take a chance of calling if there are errors in the accounting returns. In 2004, no one called the presidency. So I'm going to give you a history. This is actually to 2016. In 1936, the Literary Digest polled its readers and asked them who they were going to vote for. And their results were biased, both from the standpoint of being a biased sample and also a biased response. And the prediction was that Al Blanton would beat Roosevelt. However, on Election Day, Roosevelt won all electoral votes to date. The pre-election polls also mistakenly predicted Dewey would defeat Truman in 1948 because they stopped polling too early and missed the surge toward Truman over the last week. These events occurred largely before the major television networks were projecting elections. So the first computer was used by CBS on Election Day in 1952 to be able to call elections, and they used historical voting records along with early returns to correctly predict that Eisenhower would have a landslide victory. In 1956, all the networks were using computers to project elections. And in 1960 and 64, an NBC team led by John Tukey developed a procedure involved basically bellwether precincts to forecast the election results. ABC began using regression-based models to predict the outcome in 1964. And in the beginning of 1968, the networks went from projecting nationwide results to state-by-state results. And at the same time, CBS News Election Survey Unit, led by Warren McCoskey, began to develop models of election results based on the latest methods for statistical estimation. And these models are either actual returns from a random sample of precincts collected on Election Day, or later on in the evening, the county returns coming from the state. And beginning in the 1980s, models were based on results from exit polls in sample precincts, and they were used in some cases to estimate the outcome at poll closings before actual returns were available. What combination of data is used to make a call depends upon how close it is. If it's far apart and we feel comfortable with exit polls, and I'll talk a little bit more about the telephone polls we also use, we can call the election prior to poll closing or right at poll closing. We never call an election before all the polls in the state are closed. If it's really close, we have to wait for the actual sample precinct returns and finally for the actual county returns. In the early 1990s, the networks consolidated their efforts rather than working separately as they had for the previous 30 or 40 years. And it was under Mitofsky and his colleague Mary Edelman, who also worked on establishing quality control methods. The new organization called Voter Research and Surveys later became Voter News Service when Mitofsky left in 1994. By 2000, calling elections had gotten really difficult. No longer could the networks rely just on votes from Election Day, as the number of early voters and absentee voters were rapidly increasing. In Oregon and Washington, there were a lot of voters who were voting by mail. Added to that was the decline in response rates to exit polls, which could result in incorrect results referred to as within precinct error. Just to say, again, how this works, on Election Day, depending on the state, we will send people to do exit polls. There will be 2 interviewers across the day, and it will be in a random sample of precincts, somewhere usually between 20 and 70, usually more in the 30 to 50 range. The errors, so there was the problem with more and more absentee voters, and also with response rates and exit polls, but also in 2000, errors in the county returns were also responsible for the incorrect calls in Florida. After VNS closed in 2003, Edison Media Research and Mitofsky International were hired to produce an election projection system for a new consortium of the networks of AP called the National Election Pool. By 2004, it was no longer possible to make accurate projections without taking into account large numbers of early voters in some states. And so telephone polls using random digit dialing were conducted the weekend before the election in certain states with large numbers of early voters. State estimates involved combining the exit poll of Election Day voters and the RDD survey of early voters, weighting those based upon what proportion of the electorate we expect to be voting on Election Day versus those who voted early. Now, RDC surveys have a long history of use by political polling firms for pre-election surveys. Prior to the late 1960s, most of these polls were conducted face-to-face, but it got too expensive to do that. So working in the 1970s, Mitofsky, along with Joseph Waxberg, developed a more efficient RDD procedure for locating residential numbers among all of the possible numbers in the United States. Their efforts made the probability of hitting a residential number when you call go up from 19 or 20% to about 60%. In the early 90s, Witkowski, Cassidy, and Tucker developed an even more efficient design using only groups of 1,000 numbers that included listed residential numbers. Several problems still plague RDD surveys: declining response rates, an expanded universe of telephone numbers that led to less systematic assignment of residential numbers in these banks of numbers that were selected. And there was also cell phone-only households coming along. Today, cell-only households have increased to about 50% of all households and well over 60% when households that have both a landline and a cell phone take most of their calls by cell. To improve RDD surveys, banks of 100 numbers as opposed to 1,000 numbers are now used, and a new dual-frame design has been developed that combines landline numbers, a sample of landline numbers, and a sample of cell phone numbers. To prevent leaks in the early exit polls, beginning in 2006, the decision desk, the leaders of the decision desk for the NEP members are locked up in what's called a quarantine room from 11 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They're the only ones besides the Edison employees that have access to exit poll results. At 5 p.m., the decision desk had 3 producers and reporters on the results from the exit polls up to that point. In 2008, neither party fielded an incumbent or a sitting vice president for the first time since 1952. Pardon? It means that neither a sitting president was running or the sitting president's vice president was running. They were people who were not currently elected president or vice president. So they were more open primaries.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So in 2008, that was the case. Super Tuesday included primaries and caucuses involving both parties in more than 20 states, and the Democratic race for nomination lasted into June. Projecting primary elections are more difficult than general elections. I would say much more difficult than general elections. There are fewer use of past races that can be used in modeling for results. The order of finish has to be determined, not just the winner, if there are 3 or more candidates in a race. Caucuses are more complicated than primaries, and in the case of both caucuses and primaries, the rules established by the states are quite varied compared to the fact that on general elections, most of the rules followed are the same in each state. Again, this year, we have early voting increased in 2012, requiring even more RDB surveys of early voters during the primary season and also during the election. And again, this year, neither an incumbent nor a sitting vice president is a candidate. The Republican primary race lasted into May, and the Democratic one went into June. That accounted for about 20 election nights in which races had to be called between February the 1st and June the 7th. So now I'm going to talk about, that's sort of the history up until now. I'm going to talk about what's actually happening now. That is what we've been doing since the end of August, and we'll be continuing to do through October until we get up to Election Day. So currently, Edison is sampling precincts, or selecting a sample of precincts from all the precincts in the state, in the states in which we're going to have exit polls, and also in the states where we're going to have sample precincts. So some of the sample that are selected will be designated as exit polls if we're doing exit polls in the state. And the final results will be collected from all of the sample precincts. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Telephone samples are also being selected for dual frame surveys of early voters in those states in which there are a significant number of early voters expected, usually more than 20%. And also, particularly in those states where there's a significant number of early voters plus their battleground states in present. We're currently now we started at the end of August with election rehearsals where we have simulated results that are being sent by Edison and the Associated Press. Edison does all of the results for the sample precincts and the exit polls, and AP provides all of the county returns. We're now simulating elections, and we're having rehearsals every Tuesday and Thursday, most of them ranging from about 9 until 3 in the afternoon. And they will run twice a week, as I said, up until we get to election week. I have three election decision teams. They're assigned a set of states. I've already assigned the states I did back in early September of what states they're responsible for on election night to call all statewide races we're covering in that state. So besides rehearsing calling the elections, these decision teams are becoming familiar with all the races within the state. Most people are familiar about presidential elections in the states, but we've got 30, I don't know whether it's 33 or 34 this time of senators running. We've got somewhere in the neighborhood, I think it's 10 or 15 governors, and then we've got these referenda, mostly on things like legalizing marijuana, gun control, minimum wage, things like that. One of the teams also practices, as I said before, calling which party will control the new House using simulated data from the AP. All election projection software is being tested by the programmers and decision team members, so I've been very busy with one of the members of my decision team looking for errors possibly in the results and trying to figure out if there's a problem with the software, is there a problem with the input data, those kinds of things. We've mostly ironed out all the problems we see. 2 weekends in October, not this weekend, but the following weekend, and then a later weekend in October, will be devoted to studio rehearsals. Right now, we're currently rehearsing on our own, but on those weekends, we'll be in the studio, about 100 feet from where the broadcast actually takes place, and the on-air talent will be there, and we will be practicing calling races, and the on-air talent will practice calling the election and reporting the results. Okay, I'm going to talk about what happens on election day, but let me start with this quote from Warren Matofsky. We hope all the last-minute details have been dealt with. Everyone has his or her assignment. Everyone has been trained and rehearsed. The vote collected at the precincts, the exit poll interviewers, the analysts, those entering and reviewing vote returns and other data, and those who use the results in the television and radio studios. There are literally tens of thousands of people in a myriad of jobs. All our reference materials are where they should be. All the phone numbers we need are handy. Every computer system works. We're ready for election day, the culmination of 2 years of work. A good night's sleep, and we can be ready for the day that will last from the time we get up on election day until after the next night's network news broadcast, some 36 hours later. Unfortunately, the night's sleep is not very restful, and usually the phone rings too early in the morning about yet another problem and a few more missed details off our thinking. So that's the night before. What happens on election day? So the exit polls are conducted at a subset of the sample precincts in each of the states during the day by Edison interviewers. Exit poll interviewers sample every nth voter leaving the polls, and that every nth is based on the past vote totals and factoring in likely non-response, so that at the end of the day, the two interviewers that are assigned will have collected 100 surveys. The interviewers call the results in 3 times a day, at noon, mid-afternoon, and just before the polls close. Also on the third call, they will ask the polling place officials, they will ask them to give them an estimate of the total number of voting at that precinct that day. That's used for a turnout estimate. Other Edison employees will come after the exit poll interviewers leave and collect the actual results from the sample precincts after the polls are closed, after they've opened up the machines or have tallied the results. At 11 a.m., I, along with one decision team member and the CNN pollster, go to the quarantine room to view the results from the first wave of exit polls, as well as the polls of the early voters. At that point, we begin to look at the first wave of exit polls coming in from the East Coast. The first wave of the exit polls from the Midwest and the West will come early in the afternoon. The second wave of results from the East will start, and the Midwest will start somewhere between 2:30 and 4 o'clock. During the afternoon, we examine the results to determine if they seem to be what we would expect and that there are no obvious errors that we can detect. We also are sensitive to the possibility of within precinct errors in different states. As 5 p.m. draws near, the CNN pollster will prepare a report about the results, including who is voting for whom and why. And that will be what's used to brief the reporters and the producers after we leave the quarantine room. So after we leave the quarantine room, there's a car waiting for us wherever we are. They will take us back to the broadcast studio over there. If you don't know where CNN is, it's behind the Postal Square building in Union Station on First Street Northeast. So at the same time as the pollster is preparing her report, the other two of us will be creating paper and electronic records of what we believe to be the best estimates for each race based on the models computed for each race that we've been looking at. And there are a number of models. So on the models gets a little bit heavy, so I'm going to try to make this a little bit easier. We basically divide up a state into different geographic strata, which typically have different voting histories and different party strata. So we take the precincts and the ones that are going to be heavily Democratic versus the ones that are going to be heavily Republican. We have a scale. We divide them into strata. And those strata, as I said, is based on past voting history. The estimates are weighted by expected or actual size of the strata. So some strata are bigger than others, like cities are bigger than usually rural areas. And there's some to come up with a state estimate. These estimates, so that's just a simple sum of the weighted of the results in each strata, based from the exit poll, weighted to the size of the strata. But then there's another set of models which involve forming ratios of current candidate vote to past candidate vote. Those two votes are typically within precincts very highly correlated. So there's a ratio formed of the current vote in that precinct for candidate X to the current vote, the past vote. And based upon that ratio, we will multiply whatever we have from the exit polls to try to come up with what we have a projection of what the results are really going to be from the exit poll after everything comes in. Okay. Then we have these what we call composite estimators. So one composite estimator I've already talked about. That's where you take the RDD results and you composite it with the election day results, weighting each one to how big what proportion of the electors they are. But there are two other composites, and that is based upon looking at all the models, we come up with what we think is the best model, the best estimate, and that's based upon the one that has the lowest variance, the lowest standard error, if you make a standard error, and we composite first of all that best estimator with the RDD survey of early voters, and as I've already talked about. But then we composite it with a prior estimate based upon pre-election polling. And those two, see, when you do the RDD and the election day, we're talking about two separate electorates. So we just add them together based upon their size. But here we're talking about the same electorate. We're talking about those people who, the best estimate with both the RDD and the precinct and the exit poll precincts included, so it covers all the voters in the state, and then a prior estimate of what's going to be in the state. And so those two estimates are added together, but they're added together using weighting them by the inverse of their standard errors, basically, the variance. So if a estimate has a high variance, it's not going to be weighted as much in the common positive as one with a low variance. Okay. And we also, when we're coming out of at 5 p.m., we're also going to be having, we at best got 2 waves of data from the exit polls, and that's in the East and the Midwest. However, we have to wait for the third wave, and those third waves we start receiving shortly after we get back to the studio for the East, and they come in shortly before the polls close in the state. We do not call a race until the polls close in the entire state, even if the county returns and a split time zone state are already coming in. So calls are staggered throughout the night beginning at 7 p.m. Each decision team reviews the races in the states where the polls are ready to close and recommends which races can be called. A colleague and I consider the recommendations given by each of the decision teams for their state and either decide to make the call or to return the race to the decision team for further review. We don't think we're ready. Don't think we have enough evidence that we can call the race. Now, I will tell you, when we call the race, I have sitting next to me the CNN pollster. When I call a race, I tell her. She relays that to the producers in the control room, and they decide whether they're ready to put it on the air. And if they do, then they tell Wolf Blitzer. That's how it works. Okay. So a call is made based on an estimate of the difference between candidate percentages of the vote in the best estimator. An estimate of sampling error, the standard error, is used for testing if there is a significant difference between the candidate percentages or proportions. That's a t-test of difference in proportions. It's very simple. I mean, what's hard is gathering the data, weighting it right, getting everything in there. The t-test is just a fairly simple t-test. The difference must be large enough, the difference between candidates large enough to fall outside of a 0.005 confidence interval. Only when a candidate's lead meets the standard will a call at poll closing be considered. Even then, there may be good reason not to call the race. One reason may be that we are not sure that the exit poll results are correct. Once 10 exit poll precincts are overlaid, that is, we now, instead of having the exit poll results from that precinct, we actually have the precinct real results from that precinct. Then we'll get an estimate of the precinct error, how far off the exit polls are from the actual vote. This information about the accuracy of the exit poll may provide us the confidence needed to make a call, or may make us a little bit more wary about making a call. Of course, even then, many of the races are just too close to call without more data. We cannot call a race with the exit poll and or the actual returns from the sample precincts. We need to wait for county returns from the Associated Press. Now we have county returns are the official reported votes by precinct coming from the Secretary of State, these states. These returns are used to create both, again, a geographic model and a party county model. These aren't exit polls, these are actual county returns, using ratios of the current results to the results of the past race, just like I talked about what we did in the exit poll estimate. Each county estimate for a candidate in the current race is the vote count for the candidate weighted up by the total number of precincts in the county divided by the number of currently reporting. That is, we have the number of votes for a candidate in the county based upon the precincts in the county they're reporting, and we just inflate them based upon what percentage of the precincts are in. The standard errors of the difference between the candidates statewide and the county models are based on a regression estimator using historical data where the independent variables are the proportion of precincts reporting and the square of that proportion. I won't go into that any further. The same 0.005 significance level is used to determine if the difference in candidate percentages are sufficient to call the race. A state often releases early voting results by county very quickly. That is, the results of the voting that takes place before Election Day. When those results are a large portion of the total votes, the county models may allow us to call the race. Otherwise, we have to wait for the county returns that are coming from the election day vote, which can come in slowly and sometimes very slowly, depending on the state. To improve our chances of calling a race during this time, we do another composite. We composite the county model estimate with the best precinct estimate we had that I've already described earlier, using all the information we have to produce an integrated model. The same standard 0.005 confidence interval must be met to call the race with the integrated model. As the returns come in, decision teams will recommend a call in more and more races as the night goes on. The House model usually allows us to announce which party will control the House based upon the AP returns in the House races sometime between 9 and 10 o'clock at night.
Eastern Standard Time? Eastern Standard
Yeah.
Time?
Usually it's closer to 10 than it is to 9. As each state is called for one candidate or the other, a running tally is kept. This is for presidential elections now. Is kept of electoral votes for each candidate as they win a state. Once one candidate reaches 270, the presidency can be called. This can happen before 11 p.m. or after 11 p.m., depending on what states are called for whom. When the polls close after 11 p.m., we will get the West Coast states, which will come in quite quickly because all of those states, all three, Washington, Oregon, and California have, in Washington and Oregon, all of the voting is done early. In California, substantially 50% is done early. So if we can call those races, that may be the final thing to put somebody over the top for 270 election days. This could happen, as I said, before 11 or after 11. It can also be much later. As I said before, in 2004, we never called the presidency. We made a decision at 8 o'clock in the morning after the election that we were not going to make the call because in Ohio, which was the state that was going to determine who's going to be president, there was a controversy over provisional ballots. So we just decided we'd let that run its course and then we'd find out later. But I went back to my hotel because this was in New York at the time. I took a shower and I left to go catch a plane to come back home to LaGuardia. By the time I got to LaGuardia, the election was over. Okay, they had already made a determination in Ohio, and Kerry had decided after he was advised by his campaign people that there was no way that any of these provisional ballots in Ohio would make a difference, so he conceded, and that was before 11 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, while we're calling the presidents, we have all the other statewide races to call, including the presidential races in the remaining states that we haven't called, like Alaska and Hawaii, maybe. Actually, Hawaii closes at the same time as the West Coast, but Alaska doesn't close until 1 o'clock in the morning. So calling races will continue into Wednesday morning. Usually we finish between 4 and 6 a.m. When only a few races remain that are going to be too close to call and may require a recount. During that period of time, could happen earlier, but during that period of time, we may be able to say which party is going to be the majority in the Senate. At least some of us, however, will remain in the studio. I let people go after about 4 to 6 p.m., 8 a.m., if the presidency is not called. I and a couple of other people will be there to make the determination, usually with the other networks, whether we're going to call the presidency or not. It's just really, really close. We'll stay until we make the call and decide that we can't, based on the information. Now, if you think this is exhausting listening to this, you can imagine what's like living it. Okay? Especially when you get as old as I am. So that's pretty much what happens for election projections. All the work we do before, all the work that's done, plus all the history that's gone before us. I want to talk a little bit about the election polls, since that's the big story going on nowadays, to estimate the presidential horse race. First of all, let me say it's very hard to do estimates from pre-election polls. It's trying to get decent response rate from cell phone households and from landline households, and trying to figure out how to put those together. Increasingly, there's non-response in these telephone polls that are done, mostly telephone polls, affecting the representativeness, and especially it's very difficult to get young people on the telephone. Identifying likely voters is hard. You're calling these people in advance. You only want to talk really for, and when we're calling them in our telephone polls before the election, we only want to talk to people who have actually voted or planning on voting before election day. Here they're trying to figure out from people a month or more out what they say, who they say they're going to vote for, and whether or not they actually will show up and vote. So we have to try to figure out which ones of those people are going to be likely to actually vote. We have to allow during that time when they ask who you're going to vote for, there'll be a number of undecideds. What are we going to do with the undecideds? How do we allocate them? There are house effects. You know, we have polls coming from campaigns. We have polls coming from the media. So there can be, you know, biases in those polls as possible, depending upon who's doing the poll. We also now have a lot of polls done on the internet. We have these opt-in panels. It costs a lot of money to do good exit poll, or to do good pre-election polls, because of how much money you have as to how good it's going to be. And then there's how sophisticated are you methodologically to be able to actually run this survey and get good results. There's also a time constraint. Some of these polls are what they call tracking polls. So they are constantly calling day after day after day. And so they are averaging basically the numbers over, say, a 3-day period. Other polls and presenting the results. Other polls are just done like once every 2 weeks, once every month, and they are done in the space of anywhere from 2 to 5 days. They have to be very much time sensitive. And then you have to wait the results. So that's all of the things that have to go into a pre-election poll. So it's not very easy to do. And some people have even stopped doing pre-election polls in terms of trying to get out horse race results. National polls, however, are of great interest in presidential elections, and that's why I'm talking about this, because people are constantly watching those national polls. However, the role of state polls will continue to grow because the focus is on battleground states. And in battleground states, you're constantly having state polls that you are doing to see, because they're the most important for calling the election college. Now, I will say that those state polls, there are many, many people doing different state polls. The quality can vary on those state polls. But if you look on something like Real Clear Politics, or you look on 538, you will see that they will list a bunch of national election polls. That's what they think the election is going to be at the national level. But they will also be capturing all the state polls, particularly in those states where it's a battleground. That could be very important for the president. So given the low response rate in all the polls, representativeness can remain an issue. Telephone polls or even opt-in polls, typically the response rates now are not much above 10% if it's that high. We still have a need for large national in-person surveys. And this is my most important thing to say. We have to have large national in-person surveys like the current population survey or the American Community Survey, which are both run by the government and cost millions of dollars in order to weight the demographics correctly in these polls. If those surveys were no longer available, there'd be even more difficulty in doing pre-election polls. And as you will see, if you go to the Huffington Post or 538 or some of the other, like Real Clear Politics, you will see that they also present averages of polls, of the most recent polls. That is a more reliable indicator than relying on a single poll, because you've got basically the averages of means. Yeah, they're really averages of proportions, but You can think of it as averages of means across a number of polls. So one of the things that does is it tries to balance what there might be differences in methodology in polls, and balance also whether or not the polls are biased, like if they're done by a campaign or something like that, and we're not sure how accurate they are. Okay, I want to talk about, this is something that's really not about elections, the problems with using the horse race question to evaluate survey research. The horse race question, presidential horse race question, is very important behavior. It determines who's president. It's the best known product of survey research. The unemployment rate that comes out monthly from BLS right down the street, or the presidential approval that also comes out from the different polls, are probably the next most important. But the thing about the horse race question is it has a gold standard. We're going to know on election day who won. We're going to know what percentage they won with. Okay? So everyone wants to look at comparing what actually happened to what these polls said to see how accurate they are and to sort of try to evaluate surveys. Well, there are a lot of problems with that. First of all, the horse race question, the result from a horse race question is only one result of many, many results that come out of surveys, most of which do not have a gold standard, most of which can be much more complicated. So, for instance, trying to measure the unemployment rate is very complicated. Trying to determine, we ask questions on the American Community Survey, for instance, about commuting distance, water bills, all sorts of other questions, and like, for instance, BLS also does a consumer expenditure survey, where they're trying to collect all the expenditures that a household makes over a given period of time. These are also much more complicated measures of behavior to get. So you can't really compare a horse race question, which usually is just Democrat versus Republican, where there's only two possible answers. It's typically a binary choice. Now, we do have these minor candidates, like we're going to have Johnson and Stein, but typically we're looking at a binary choice. It's a constrained distribution. We could have said months ago probably that we know that each candidate will get at least 40%. So all of the action is between the 40-yard line. And in many cases, it's between the 45 and the 45. And so think of it as being a 10-point range. It's going to be a 10-point range between the two candidates, at most. When you start talking about confidence intervals, it can be as much as plus or minus 3%. You've covered 60% of that range. Okay? The other thing that's really problematic is that you could be within the margin of error and have chosen the wrong candidate to win. Okay? I mean, statistics was not designed to give you a precise answer of who's going to win. So you could be on the wrong side of 50. Okay? Well, then you get evaluated and say, oh, well, you were terrible. You didn't get the right winner. But that's not really how to evaluate it. So there are lots of reasons why the horse race question is not the best question to use to evaluate research, survey research, which in many cases tries to measure and answer much more complicated questions than who you're going to vote for. Okay, so this is, somebody will explain what this is.
The Election Prediction 2016, it's a great event for high school and college students. It's a contest in which the students can create their own state-by-state election predictions. And so the URL is on the slide, but we also have some information on the table. So for our remote viewers, the URL is probably your best bet. But it's just a good opportunity to sort of explore some of these ideas and create some of your own polls and try to make your own predictions state by state. Thank you so much for giving us.
Oh, another WSS coffee?
Yeah,
I think I